Thank you for coming. I'm David Barnard, President and Vice-Chancellor of the University of Manitoba. I expect that everyone in this room believes that a healthy post-secondary education system is critical to the future prosperity of this province and essential to making Manitoba a great place to live, work, and play. Tonight offers us the opportunity for an open discussion that recognizes the differing views we hold about how that system operates and how it should be funded. Before we delve too deeply into our topic, let's acknowledge that our post-secondary institutions need to be open to the Indigenous community and Indigenous ways of knowing. We're located on the original lands of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene people, and on the homeland of the Métis Nation. We respect the treaties that were made on these territories, acknowledge the harms of the past, and dedicate ourselves to move forward in partnership with Indigenous communities in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. Recently, the post-secondary institutions of this province came together to develop and sign the Manitoba Collaborative Indigenous Education Blueprint, with the shared goal of making Manitoba a global center of excellence for Indigenous education and research. By working together, our institutions can address pressing issues in post-secondary education and create meaningful positive changes in the province. And I think that's really a remarkable accomplishment and a great example of collaboration in the system. So now I'd like to ask the panelists to join me on stage. We have a distinguished group here tonight, including Michael Barkman, Chairperson of the Manitoba Canadian Chapter of the Canadian Federation of Students, Gervan Fearon, President and Vice-Chancellor of Brandon University, Kevin Settee, Vice President External Affairs for the University of Winnipeg Students Association, Jeremiah Kopp, President of the University of Manitoba Students Union, Annette Trimby, President and Vice-Chancellor of the University of Winnipeg, Heather Tulk, Chief Customer Officer at Manitoba Telecom Services, representing the business community here, Alex Usher, President of Higher Education Strategy Associates and a leading post-secondary education expert internationally, and Paul Vogt, President and CEO of Red River College. Please welcome them. We also have a number of people in the audience. I know that you'll want to speak, and we hope to hear from you. In the past, issues related to post-secondary education have sometimes been debated in an adversarial manner. Tonight, I hope we can have a robust and meaningful discussion, not dominated by any one question. Let's listen to each other, let's be respectful, open, and constructive. In the interest of a balanced discussion, I would ask that all participants keep their remarks brief and on topic. Many of you will want to speak or ask a question tonight, and we want to hear from as many voices as time allows. So it's important that no one speaker monopolizes our time. The intent for tonight is to have a constructive conversation, so participation that prevents other perspectives from being heard isn't helpful, and we don't want that here. Our discussion will benefit if we examine the post-secondary education system broadly, rather than focusing on one institution at the expense of others. So let's respect the representatives who are here today and engage them in finding solutions, and I thank you in advance for your cooperation. This series of visionary conversations in the community is supported by our important partners, the United Way of Winnipeg, the Business Council of Manitoba, and the Winnipeg Free Press. I thank all of you. As I mentioned earlier, there will be opportunities throughout the evening for you to comment on the topic and ask questions of the panel. There will be wireless microphones that will be circulating with faculty members, staff members looking for speakers on each side, one on each side of the auditorium. If you'd like to ask a question, raise your hand, and our volunteers will identify who speaks next and provide the microphone. I would say to those of you in the front, if you catch my attention, that won't help you. You need to catch their attention because they're deciding. You can also follow our conversation on Twitter using the hashtag UMVisionary. So we're ready to begin. Let's make this a truly visionary conversation. A good place to start is with Alex Usher, who is a keen commentator on post-secondary trends, provincially, nationally, internationally. Alex, I'd like to invite you to open the discussion by providing us with some context on the leading issues in post-secondary education.
Thanks. In that very short film we had at the beginning there, I actually thought that the four words that flashed up on the screen pretty much summed up everything. I think three of them, access, innovation, innovative and practical, sums up a lot of what's being asked of the system these days. And I think, the access one is obvious. The innovative and practical is a tough one for universities. 100 years ago, the University of Manitoba was located right about here. It was located along Broadway and along St. Mary's. That's where most of the colleges were. United College, of course, was part of the University of Manitoba system at the time. It was embedded in the urban structure. And it was a decision in the 1930s, which was common at the time, which said you need to have universities out on the edge of town, right? They can't be caught up in the hurly-burly of downtown living. That's bad for students. It's disruptive. You need someone apart. And that's the exact antithesis of the way we think today. We talk a lot about the need, for instance, for universities to be more flexible, to be more engaged. I think some of the most interesting universities in the world right now are those that are particularly what I like to call permeable, where you don't actually see the distinction between where the university ends and where the community begins and where enterprise begins. Stanford and Silicon Valley is an obvious example of it. I think in Canada, the example you would see right now would be Ryerson, making the same kinds of steps forward. And so that notion of being permeable actually is a really important challenge that has to be embedded at every level of the institution. How do you know that what you're teaching your students is actually valuable to them, that practicality piece? That requires a much more constant dialogue with society, employers, and those kinds of things than we've had before. How do we make sure that the research that we have is turning into valuable products for the community? Again, that's very intensive relationships with actors outside the institution we used to have. It's a big mind shift for universities. And I think, by and large, as we ask them to take on those tasks of moving more and more of our young people from secondary school into the labor market, we need to pay more attention to that. As we ask the universities in a knowledge economy to be a bigger player in economic development, you need to see more of that. But it's a very big mind shift. It's reversing the last 100 years, in the University of Manitoba's case, of the migration, physical migration from the center of the economy out to the periphery and bringing it back again. That said, the other challenge that keeps me up at night when I think about universities across the country, it is the money. The question you have is about does Manitoba put the right value on it? And it does. It's the only province that's spent greater than inflation. The increases in spending have been greater than inflation in each of the last 4 years. There's no other province in the country where that's true. At the same time, are we spending it wisely? Right? Manitoba is one of 2 provinces where students in 4-year programs, entry-level 4-year programs, receive more in subsidies than they pay in tuition. Right? That's a big deal. Or is that the right way to be spending the money? And so I think those are questions we have to think about as times get tougher, as growth gets slower. I think they're key issues that have to be part of the conversation.
Okay, great. Thank you. So, Alex can always be relied on to be provocative and iconoclastic. I'd look for participation from the audience. If you want to get thinking about that, I'll pose a couple of questions on the platform here to get started. So maybe I can start with Michael and Jeremiah. You're both student leaders in the province. I'd be interested in hearing from you. Michael first, and then Jeremiah. What's your perspective of the value of post-secondary education? What can we do to increase its value?
Yeah. I think an important place, can everyone hear me okay? I hope so. Cool. Yeah? Yeah, there we go, okay. An important place to start, I think, is really it's a good question, is the value of post-secondary education and kind of the deeper question about the role that education in general plays in our society. And then I think following that, we've had discussions about cost and that sort of thing, but I think for me what's really important is looking at the quality and accessibility of our education system and the role that it plays more broadly in our society. And I think my sense is, my hunch, that a lot of people in this room and a lot of people on this panel are going to agree that our post-secondary education system is so critical for our province and so critical for our country. I don't think that there's necessarily a huge debate, at least among the panelists here. I could be wrong. But I think it's still important to reiterate why that's so valuable. I come from a family of a lot of teachers and some professors as well, so maybe I have an education just kind of ingrained in my blood. But I grew up knowing that education was so critical for my social mobility, for being a critical thinker, for my participation in the labor market. And I was really privileged as coming from a family of teachers, knowing that post-secondary, whatever it was, whether it was university, college, trades, it was in my future. And I really recognize that now, especially I study politics and urban and inner city studies at the U of W. So the urban and inner city studies campus is on Selkirk Avenue in the north end of Winnipeg. And there's a really neat and interesting and very diverse student body that comes through there. And I've certainly learned a lot about the different struggles that other students have faced, and this perception that education wasn't quite as kind of cut and dry for them, whereas it maybe was for me. So I think what we can really look at is, if we're starting and predicated on knowing that education is valuable in our society, we need to talk about who has access to it and how are we ensuring that as many people in Manitoba and in Canada have access to it as possible. So I think that's kind of the important question coming out of that.
Great. Jeremiah?
Yeah, similarly to Michael, I was lucky to be brought up in a household where both my parents were teachers and educators, and who really instilled a love for learning early on in life, and really opened my eyes to how many different areas of our society it touches. And what's beautiful about post-secondary education in this province is no matter who you talk to, no matter who you ask, they'll have a different answer for why it's important to our society. Could be that it's retaining youth in our province, making sure that they have great jobs or are creating value in the marketplace. It could be that they're just enriching their knowledge of society and culture and giving back to society that way. And what we've seen, especially lately amongst universities and post-secondary education, is really thought leadership from universities in reconciling broad societal issues, especially ones that we're facing here in Winnipeg and across Manitoba. So I think that's the most amazing thing about post-secondary education, is that everybody will have a love for it, but everybody will have a love for it in different ways. And I know over the years I've taken a little bit of flack for my liberal arts degree, and some of my friends say, well, what's that going to contribute to the economy? But I think, looking to our friends in the South, I think if a few more Americans had a liberal arts degree, maybe Donald Trump wouldn't be quite so successful as he is right now. But there's a lot of ways that this impacts our society and our community, and it's great to see.
I think we should agree that political commentary should be restricted to south of the border. Is that
Hey, Dave,
Thank you both.
I'm gonna,
Sure.
if you don't mind.
Please.
My name is Kevin Satie. One of my philosophies, or one of my beliefs in life, is that everybody has a gift, and that everybody needs to use their gift to instill hope into people and into the world. And in terms of secondary and also post-secondary education, I think that these institutions should be places where all students can come and find their gift and also nurture it. So I believe that universities should be as accessible and inclusive to everybody as possible. If we only have a certain group of people that are able to come to university and get an education, we're privileging, we can be privileging certain people. So I think that universities need to be as accessible as possible. And I think that, with the University of Winnipeg, that they're doing a pretty good job. And the province has been doing a pretty decent job in terms of, funding certain projects and stuff like that. So coming from that, that perspective that everyone has a gift, and that educations have a major role, post-secondary education has a major role in, helping them find them and hone them.
So just as a point of interest, how many of us in the room, I'm one of them, how many of us in the room were the first generation in our families to go to university? Quite a few, actually. And of others, those of you who came from families, went to university and came from families that already had parents or others who had gone to university. So about balanced, I think, in the audience tonight. So two quite different sets of experience. So questions, let's take some questions from the floor. Okay?
Hello, my name is Jesse Blackman. I'm with the University of Winnipeg Students Association. It's great to see my colleague up there and so many familiar faces. I'm also a frequent reader of your blog, Alex, and I appreciate a lot of your commentary. Whether I agree with it or not, I think it's valuable insights. In specific, I think that there's been a lot of context already given about access and quality education, and I kind of almost want to bury into your first comment, or the end of your first comment. In a recent article, blog post, you described how the Canadian dollar and its decline is creating a choice for Canadian universities between selling their tuition as a luxury compared to American universities or a bargain. You argued that universities like UBC, McGill, and U of T could stand to increase their tuition 20% and still have a market-clearing ability in the Canadian economy. While there was the student aid available in Canada, as you mentioned, and while people who are financially unstable are more risk-averse and therefore less likely to take on loans. This may not impact the population of PSE, but will certainly impact the demographics of who enrolls. Is the quantity of enrollment as valuable as diverse enrollment, and how does this reflect on the public good? Thank you.
I think diversity of enrollment is really important. And it's actually one of the reasons you don't want to subsidize everybody the same way. I think, I was looking at the numbers, again, here in Manitoba, somebody who comes from a family earning $150,000, and that student finishes in 4 years, stays in the province afterwards, gets the full tuition tax rebate. That student is going to receive $1,000 more in subsidies than they're going to pay in tuition. I would far rather put most of that money into finding ways, and in Manitoba, I think, into access programs. I would far rather see that money go into scholarship programs for Aboriginal students than I would for the families earning $150,000. So I don't really have, the issue is not that there's you can have market clearing tuition for some people, and you can have diversity. Those are not necessarily in conflict with one another. It's about how carefully you choose to discriminate and who you spend it on. And I think that's been my concern about the drift in policy in Canada over the last few years. Increasingly, we're spending money on richer and richer students, and I don't see the point in that.
Your contribution.
My name is Syed Hassan, and I'm a curriculum consultant at Red River College. Prior to that, I had been teaching at Red River College for about 10 years. I would start off by continuing on the theme of access. When we talk about access, we're also talking about people knowing what they're accessing or what they have access to. From my experience, I think there's a bit of a lack of good understanding of programs and careers in general amongst secondary education students. And that limit and clouds their choices. And I'm not sure if there are actually two questions. The first one is, does it fall upon us, the post-secondary folks, to do some work to enhance the understanding in secondary education, not only about the institutions and what they entail, but individual programs and career paths? And the second part of the question would be, if that is the case, are we doing enough? Thank you.
Paul?
Well, excellent question. Thank you very much. Certainly, from a Red River perspective, I think more information and more information provided earlier about career pathways to students. And by earlier, I mean as early as junior high and throughout the secondary system, I think would greatly enhance the choices that students make, their awareness of the choices, and I think ultimately would benefit the post-secondary system and therefore the products, the students, the other benefits that are generated from it. There has been some work recently that the province has undertaken to to provide better information to students who are mulling their career choices and to bring it all into one central place. But I think we all recognize, because we all went through that stage of our lives, you need credible people, people who are close to you, peers, parents, to be in conversation with you about what your options are, people who know you well. And I think that there's a tremendous amount that can be done within our school system. I think those who are close to the K-12 system are aware that quite a few people who are described as counselors, in fact, spend almost all of their time dealing with discipline issues in schools. And in fact, the counseling function really varies greatly from school to school. And if you've had students recently in our school system or children who have gone through that school system, quite a few of them really receive only the bare minimum. And yet, you think of the importance that we place on that choice. And I think everybody on this stage, and probably in the audience, would agree. It is one of the most fundamental decisions you make. What we're seeing increasingly in the post-secondary system, of course, is people make choices that they later revise, sometimes quite drastically. There's the issue both of attrition, but also of people finding out well into a program that it's simply not the right fit. And while I think that there's a need to provide a lot of room within the post-secondary system, and I'll probably be addressing that a little bit later to students who make choices about where to further their education, I still think that we could do a major service in providing better information about career pathways and the best way to get to them. I think not only Red River, which obviously is very career focused, but I think all of the post-secondary institutions and students would benefit from that.
Yeah, I think there's two things I'd say. One is that I think the direction of your question I agree with and the answer, but I think we need to go even deeper than the secondary school system. Like there's a growing body of research that children are making career choices by exclusion very early. So, I've been very involved in women in science and technology, engineering and math and STEM, and there's a lot of research that girls are actually deciding before grade 3 whether or not they would pursue STEM careers because of, they're either learning or being told or deciding really early before they've actually had a chance to explore their options, what they are or they aren't. And I think it's the same with boys in many cases as well. And so I think that, having a holistic system that allows for learners and explorers at every stage of the system, which I think feeds into, why do you have to decide in grade 11 what you're going to do with the rest of your life? I've been working 20 years and I don't know what I'm going to do with the rest of my life. And so a generation of learners and a generation of explorers, I think, is really, really important, which leads to the second point, which, here I guess as the token industry person on the panel, I think it's really important that the post-secondary system and society start questioning the employers about their beliefs and their roles in it. And I get very frustrated when I see people believing that certain tracks are the way you should end up with certain roles. I've worked in the telecommunication industry my entire career. It's kind of fun because I get to tell my kids I built the internet. I'm very clear to say I didn't invent it. I'm not like Al Gore. But when I was in university, there was no path to be a builder of the internet. There was no path to be someone who was going to, be involved in driving out wireless networks around the world. These things didn't exist. They weren't, and they weren't even contemplated. And so what was really important in post-secondary was generating an ability to explore and learn. And I think that one thing I would like to see is more balanced programming, where instead of, to the point you were making, we force kids into deciding, are you going to do liberal arts or are you going to do business? Are you going to do engineering or are you going to do general sciences? Are you going to do engineering or are you going to do liberal arts? I think we need to find a way to not pigeonhole the learning of people, because the world doesn't work like that when you get out. I spend my day seamlessly moving between policy things that I think liberal arts backgrounds are really important, through to engineering discussions in my job, to financial discussions, back to human resource issues. That's the reality of a career path you're going to have, and having that ability to look at problems from many different angles is critically important, I think, in the workplace of the future.
I would just contrast my experience with yours a little bit. I'm a computer scientist, and my kids were still very, very little when they took the advantage over me of explaining what was happening. I'd be interested in comments from Annette and Gervan on this matter of deciding and streaming. I sometimes like to ask people the question, how many, or think for yourself. Are you doing now what you thought you would be doing when you were 18 years old and choosing courses? Most of us are not, right? So there is a kind of a choice streaming debate, and there's a flexibility argument to be made as well. So I don't know, Annette and then Gervan?
Well, I'll start by saying that when I was 18, I was a student at the University of Winnipeg studying biology, and I wanted to be a biology professor. And I've done just about everything but that since then. But now I'm back at the University of Winnipeg, so I never dreamed I would be president of the University of Winnipeg, but I have had about 15 different careers, although they're all with one employer. But I was a senior official in Treasury Board, Finance, Health and Wellness, Environment, you name it. And I was an imposter pretty much everywhere. So anyways, good point. I think we need to give people choice.
Would you like to come and teach? just a thought.
Yeah. Well, it is about keeping all doors open, giving people lots of choices, not only with respect to what to take, but how to learn. And I think that's something I really like about the system in Manitoba, that we offer different types of learning experiences. And you're absolutely right. We are educating people for jobs that don't yet exist. We're not just educating employees to take the jobs that industry is advertising for today. We are educating tomorrow's employers, tomorrow's entrepreneurs. So I think we are preparing people for a future that will be very different than the future that we had, and people will have much less linear careers. But then you balance that with what you hear from parents. If I'm going to help my child go to university or go to Red River, will they get a job, and how will it pay, and how do you get them through the program real quick, because it costs, right? So you have to balance access, quality, affordability, choice, and efficiency.
Gervan.
I can take up from position or comments that Annette just made. First, if one takes a look at the labor market in terms of making a prediction as to what will be the best job or the best training to have for 10 years from now, I suspect that most of us, in terms of market forecasts, labor market forecasts, would be wrong. And you could just take a look at what happened in computer science. I can recall with a bit of gray, starting off with computers with key punching and having cards. And today that's completely obsolete if you train that way. So what will be needed in 10 years or 20 years will be drastically different. So in some senses we need in the education system to train individuals to be flexible in the labor market. But also in terms of citizenship, the kinds of questions that are facing this generation forward. When I was at university, global warming was not top of mind. Today it is top of mind, and as a result we need to have individuals going through universities and colleges who are able to be engaged citizens in those kinds of debates and those kinds of questions. But similar to Annette's comment, there is the contrary side to it, where individuals are increasingly market driven and looking at education as an investment and looking at the rate of return on that investment, and consequently then demanding a rate of return on the field that you invest in, and also asking what's the probability of immediate employment. So in that sense, there is a natural tension, and I think the post-secondary education system, whether college or university, is trying to balance off that tension of saying we can provide you with the immediate employment opportunity, but we also want to train you for innovation and possibilities that don't yet exist. So there is a natural tension in the system that we're trying to balance.
Great, thank you.
Thanks for mentioning the elementary and even the secondary system. I'm Sherry Rowlands, and I'm the Vice Chair of the Winnipeg School Division. And so I appreciated your comments very much with respect to how early it starts. We have these wonderful rooms in many of our schools that are called creation rooms. And to me, a 41-year-old, they look like a collection of sound equipment, wires, and there's a few children that know how to program in them. And they're doing something wonderful in there. They're creating. And to me, that's the school system responding in a wonderful way for those careers of the future. And we have partnerships in the Winnipeg School Division with all of you to make sure that our students are seeing what post-secondary looks like and aspiring to that well before they're thinking of attending. And so thank you for that. I'm interested in continuing this theme on how you keep up with, even thinking of creation rooms where kids are in there programming what I do not know, even if I sit beside them. And how do you keep up? How do you keep relevant? Like universities, our schools are indicators of trends, and we see those trends currently, whether it's 30 years ago, the primacy of Indigenous education and what that would be, or right now, mental health and how important that needs to be, that current unfunded stream that we're delivering frontline services for, and our teachers are delivering frontline services for. And that's why you so rightly point out that our counselors are very immersed in doing that service versus what are you going to be when you grow up? Because if kids are asking that, they're A-okay. And we think that they're going to be just fine, and we want to continue on. So how do you keep up? It's a fairly general, amorphous question, but good luck with it.
Annette.
So part of keeping up is, you referred to universities needing to be permeable, and Alex, you talked about right in the middle of hurly-burly. So we need to throw ourselves into the hurly-burly and really understand what's going on in the community and bring some life to learning. So we need to stay contemporary, and you do that by staying in touch, staying in tune, and looking beyond your borders. But then the tricky part is if you're creating new things, new programs, new things you need to do, you have to look at some of the old ways that you're doing things, and you have to maybe give up a few things. And that's where we have the biggest challenges. And when I say we, I'm talking about the royal we. I'm looking, Gerald Farthing's in the audience somewhere. I used to work as a deputy minister. You dream up programs. It's very difficult to stop a program, change a program. It's much easier to add. And I'm sure you live that same life, right?
I first want to start, I like the analogies, and what I think about a lot, especially coming from my personal background, is the comparison to the secondary sector. And I think that's really exciting. What you're talking about is the way that we've allowed our public schools from K to 12 to have opportunities for students to be focused on their education. I mean, I'm a direct product of the Manitoba education system in that way. I could pursue sports and arts while doing my academics. And I think what's interesting, and it's an analogy that I think is important to bring out, is that there wasn't a conversation, me as a 15-year-old in grade 10, about the personal investment that I was making in this education that I was doing when I was going to high school. It was that it was just a natural thing that what I was learning, what I was participating in, and those chances for me to be in a creative classroom were both a personal benefit, but also of benefit to the society that I was going to step into. And I'm definitely of that generation when a lot of the conversation we had when I was in high school was around you're joining society, you can be a leader in society, you can take those steps, and that's really exciting. But I think what's so concerning to me is that the number one barrier after people are done participating in that system to go into post-secondary is cost. That's a huge barrier for so many students. And what it does is it still keeps up these stereotypes about our institutions. We can all imagine what a stereotypical university student is and how they afforded to go there, who a college student is, and who's someone who doesn't even go and decide to pursue that. So I think for me, what we really should examine is that cost piece, and that when we eliminate those barriers, that number one barrier, we have a chance for people then to be focused on their education, to be focused on finding out the jobs that don't even exist yet. But for so many, that's not even an option in their brain. I was just talking to my sister today. She works at Fort White Alive, so it's a farm program where they have students come in from the inner city to work on farming. And she was saying I talk to 17-year-olds or 16-year-olds every day who don't even know how they would begin to pursue a college or university degree. And this is who she's talking to every day. And I think that this is a really critical concern that we need to be addressing and ensuring that everybody has the option to pursue whatever they're interested in and having those chances. The last little piece that I'll mention is what I think is exciting about that, one of the ways moving forward, is to me it really diversifies the classroom. I benefit from that all the time, in that the classroom that I'm in isn't a stereotypical university experience. I have parents in my classroom. I have people who have been working for 20 years and they come back to the classroom. I have students who are from a reserve up north, who are the first in their family in university. These experiences, and when people are sharing that, and that diversity in the classroom, to me creates innovation. It creates discussions that are so interesting, and it creates thoughts and new ideas that wouldn't happen if we had a system that continued to prevent so many from attending post-secondary. So I think that benefit of diversity is what's so key when we create access.
Gervan, where you want to?
Yeah. In terms of the core point you were making, how do individuals keep up, and taking a look at that core question, when you take a look at historically at most universities and colleges, the way we structure our programs almost a 9-to-5 type framework. Individuals who are already, say, graduated or in other jobs and the likes may want to be able to access what's available in our post-secondary education system in a schedule that's more in line with their needs, whether on weekends, whether in evenings, whether online, and so on. So part of closing that gap is also universities and colleges taking a look at what we deliver and when we deliver and how accessible that is. And one of the comments being made in terms of the cost of education, often when we impute the cost of education, as it relates to tuition, what's paid. We don't impute the cost of education in terms of the opportunity cost of that individual giving up an hour of pay or their job in order to access post-secondary education. So the more we make it more accessible, we're also implicitly reducing the cost of education as well, because it's now enabling that individual to continue their education and the likes. And I think forums such as this, where there's a set of educators and the likes engaging, this is part of the education process, not simply the formal process that happens. I think I would, as I think about the cost of education that's come up a couple of times and so forth, coming from Ontario, having lived in the US a little while and so forth, not disputing that cost of education is important, but I wouldn't want anyone, at least in my mind, to underestimate how affordable education in Manitoba is relative to a lot of other jurisdictions. And that then says if individuals aren't accessing education, post-secondary education in Manitoba, there may be other factors simply than the tuition sticker price as well. So, and we need to look at all the factors that aid access to education, all those factors that detract from it as well.
Yeah, I think to the question of keeping up, I just, from my perspective, I've long given up on keeping up. I think that most businesses in some ways have, it's about trying to stay on the curve, not trying to keep up with the curve. And I think what's been great in the business realm and in a lot of, and some not-for-profits I'm involved with is, how you can think of the concept of, if you're familiar with agile technologies, bringing that into your everyday life. And so I think the ability to plan like 3-year programs and then fund these programs and then launch these programs and then build these programs and launch these programs, by the time the program's launched, a lot of your fundamental assumptions have already changed, and that's the fact of the world today. So it's about how do we evolve everything we do a little bit each and every day, each and every month, each and every quarter. And so as we're building into this, because in fact, that's how the needs in the industry are evolving. Like, if you look at one of the big areas of careers now that there's a big career gap for, it's data and analytics. And no one sat back 5 years ago in industry and planned out where that might go. That's evolving real time, every day, each and every day. And the programs and the suppliers if you will, of that labor force have to be in the same way, like evolving, semester in, semester out, on top of each other, constantly learning, constantly improving. And I think, if someone sat back, to your point, 5 years ago and said, I wonder what the need's going to be in 2016, maybe someone would have predicted it was data analytics, but it wouldn't have been very widespread. And the reality is, but if those programs had been evolving with the way society was evolving, those things would have kept closer lockstep, I think.
Alex?
So that's absolutely right. And I think if you want to look at one university that does really, really well at keeping up with those trends, it's Waterloo. And they don't just do it because they're a tech institution. It's because the function of co-op, right, having your students spend that time in the labor market, that's your bridge back and forth to the economy. And so they have a professoriate that makes those adjustments on the fly all the time because they're hearing back from students in the classroom every single term. This is what's happening out there. This is what I used. This is what I didn't use. Now, the corollary is for that to work, you have to get your students jobs. And Waterloo has historically done that by having the best technology in the classrooms, right? I mean, they were letting students loose on computers in 1971 when many University of Toronto, they were still arguing whether or not to let undergrads in the library stacks. You equip them with the best technology. That's not cheap, right? Red River College, how do you get the right kind of technology, CNC technology? There's a lot of technology out there, and governments don't put enough money in for that kind of stuff. I don't think institutionally we do a very good job of prioritizing that stuff, right? People always complain about putting money into infrastructure and capital rather than into salaries. That's a problem, right? We actually have to find ways to prioritize that stuff. And that's, so to make sure the students get the jobs. And to make just a very last point, I would disagree respectfully with a few of the people here about how we can't predict what the labor market's going to look like. It's absolutely true we can't predict the exact nature of the occupations people are going to have. But I don't think it takes a crystal ball to say automation is going to replace a lot of jobs over the next 10 or 15 years. And literally every department, every faculty should be thinking about what are the individual tasks that are going to be taken over by automation in the fields, in the occupations that our work feeds, and what remains that cannot be automated, and what can we do better to give our students an edge in those areas. So I think that actually we really do need to do.
That's if you assume that artificial intelligence isn't going to automate everything.
I'm pretty sure.
Longer discussion.
So I've got a list here, Paul, and Jeremiah, and Annette.
Well, I think the short answer to how do you keep up or try to keep up, acknowledging that's an ongoing effort, is partnerships. And I think the idea of permeability, it's not simply an attitude or a posture. You actually have to set up mechanisms so you are getting the feedback on the experience of your graduates, the relevance of the skills that they've acquired. And I'm not just talking about relevance in the workforce. I'm thinking as well about citizenship, about needs that are being provided in the community sector by people who are educated through our post-secondary system. And I think that to me is both the answer to how you keep up with your programming, and I think increasingly it's going to be the answer to how you can afford to provide the kind of education that actually is relevant in a lot of areas. And obviously this particularly applies to Red River, but I think it applies very generally. The cost of providing the kind of equipment in the classroom that our graduates are going to be operating on or using in the workplace is probably beyond what we could afford under any conceivable funding mechanism. We actually need to develop partnerships with employers where they're bringing us their equipment. It's in their interest to do so. And I think there's a very strong value proposition there that we put to them. But But we have to set up those partnerships, and I think they have to be active and real. And I think that, in a nutshell, is really the answer to how we strive to keep up in the post-secondary system.
Thanks, Paul. Jeremiah?
Yeah, I thought it was a really great question, Sherry, and I want to bring it back to the earlier years there and sort of pick up with what Paul just said. The interplay between the different levels and the different components of the educational system here in the province really need to look at not just what kind of student these people are, but what kind of individuals they are and who they are as human beings and what kind of learners they are. In those formative years, everybody is developing their self-identity, and they do that by focusing all too often on their strengths and not looking at the full range of possibilities. A couple of people have mentioned that, and I know for myself personally, it was very young. At a very young age, I said, well, I'm not good at math, and I kind of just embraced my strengths rather than saying, well, am I good at math because I can't do it, or am I good at math because I tell myself that I can't do it? And I think it's the latter. And it's too often that people solidify their identity early on in their life, but also we have to look at what kind of students are coming out of those early year education systems and how they conceptualize university and post-secondary education, much like the conversation we're having here. What did they think they're going into university for? And a lot of times I hear from my peers that they're just going in to get a good job, and they don't necessarily see that societal component to it. Some people do, but a lot of times it's what can I put in to get out of it as an individual economically. And I think that we really have to be teaching students at a young age that they can do anything that they want, that there shouldn't be any limitations, that in terms of their identity, they should be embracing the things that they need to work on and find that love of learning. Because at the end of the day, these institutions are really centers for furthering human intellectual thought. That's why we're at these schools. And if you do something that you're passionate about, and if you find something that you love and you learn and you educate yourself, that economic value will come. If you go into the world and if you find something that you love and you do it to the best of your ability, that component will come. But making sure that students don't limit themselves from an early age, that they think that everything is possible, and that they think everything is possible because of the access to it and because they know that whatever it may be, the government, the institutions themselves will make it accessible to them, and that financial barriers won't be the issue. That's how we really, at a young age, make sure that students are keeping an open mind to things and not limiting themselves.
Annette? Kevin?
So two threads. First, we talked about predictability of future employment, and we talked about relevance. There are some skills that are always relevant, or some aspirations, talents, whatever. And the truth is we will need leaders, and leaders are not necessarily people with fancy titles, but they're people that know how to inspire others and behave in appropriate ways. So I think that's something we can really count on, that it should be part of our roles here to inspire and educate the next generation of leaders. Then I also just want to go back to some of the comments about the importance of affordability in accessibility. And I just want to stress that accessibility is more than affordability. And one of the terms I just learned today, but I'm going to use it again and again, is somebody talked to me about our Pathways programs to university as being the programs that would help people, young people in elementary school, develop a university-bound identity.
Yes.
I love that phrase because that's not something I had as a child, right? I did not know anybody who had gone to university. So that's a huge part of what I think we all need to work together on if we want to have the diverse classrooms that Mike was talking about.
Yeah, I was going to say that we're talking a lot about like accessibility and jobs and economy and predicting the future and stuff like that. But I think an important perspective to bring to the table is, what are the root issues that are, making it more difficult for students, to continue education, to get into education. So, if you look at, student poverty on campuses, at the University of Winnipeg, we're seeing more usage of our student food banks. Our student support program, that is emergency financial support for students, has run out, 2/3 of the way through our budget year. So those are real issues that are access issues. Student poverty. If we want to create, access for student parents, what are the childcare situations on campuses in Manitoba and across Canada. Do post-secondary institutions have a role in childcare? I think that post-secondary education institutions do. If you want to call yourself an accessible institution, you'll have childcare to make it possible for non-traditional students to attend your institutions. And carrying on what Annette was talking about as well with the pathways. If you look at the Urban Inner City Studies Department and the Merchants Corner and the money that was put into there, the UWSA is going to have a satellite office there, and Community Education Development Association is going to have spaces in there as well, and they work a lot with North End high schools, and so we're looking to develop those partnerships and have students working with those high school students, potentially creating cohorts and tutoring programs. So like, what are the kind of, programs that we can develop? What are the kind of support systems, innovative support systems that we can create and work on together is, I think, what we need to be thinking about as well.
I think that's a really good point. I think part of the challenge for those of us who are in leadership roles in these institutions is finding the best way to allocate the resources that are available to some areas of very special need, and then to the more generic needs. And Alex was making the point in his earlier remarks that sometimes we see money allocated either by institutions or by governments to places where, and to individuals who would have made the decision with or without the money, where what we really want to do is target the money to places where change is going to occur and use public money to achieve public results that wouldn't have otherwise been achieved, right? I think that's... Okay, up at the back.
Hello, 2 points. One I wasn't going to bring up, but I was glad to hear that the members of the panel brought up this idea of AI, and I thought it'd be unwise to bring it up because it sounded like a crankpot, but Bill Gates and Stephen Hawking and Elon Musk, some of you may have heard, talked about the medium term being 25 years from now, so maybe we shouldn't talk about that, maybe it's too far ahead. But that said, they have some serious concern about there being very few jobs with the acceleration of artificial intelligence. So I'm not sure if the panel wants to talk more about that, because maybe it's too far away to talk about. And if I may, very briefly, my original point to stand up was to talk about the apprenticeship programs that I believe exist in Europe, maybe more specifically in Germany is my impression. They have a strong apprenticeship program. And this panel have talked a great deal about using the word university. And as a faculty advisor, I see new teachers teach in the school system, and kids talk about university, and they talk about that kind of education. I never hear anybody talk about trades in the work, the small amount of work that I do. I wonder if so the question is, I wonder if the apprenticeship program in Germany in particular, that I have little idea about, but I believe it exists quite strongly, whether the movers and shakers at this table, at this session, believe that the apprenticeship program that we see in Europe might be more powerfully advanced in this province, at least for the next 25 years, before computers do all that work for us. Thank you.
I think there's some very good evidence, and I think most of the institutions represented here are responding to opportunities for students to be involved in what we sometimes refer to as high-impact learning experiences, which can involve being embedded in the workplace and being embedded in the research context and so on. But Alex, are you comfortable to respond to that?
Look, the German system is fascinating, but it's the product of 110 years of institutional development that you can't just sort of say, hey, let's do a German system. It's the product of having a particular size of employer. Apprenticeship systems work better when you've got large employers. Canada tends not to have them. I think the important thing about Germany, what you want to keep in mind is you get a much broader group of industries involved in this kind of work-involved learning. So, for instance, the number one apprenticeship trade in Germany is retail sales. Okay, that's about 5% of the apprentices there. And then you go down to, sort of industrial purchasing clerks. And I think 7 of the 10 top apprenticeship fields in Germany are not apprenticeships here. But they are areas where we do co-op. Right? So I think let's focus less on the specifics of that, and let's think about what are the experiences we're giving people, either through college or apprenticeship or university, whatever it is, to have some kind of experience in the workforce as they're learning. Not that that's the only purpose of learning, obviously, but as they're going through their programs, that you're giving them these opportunities to learn and to apply that in a work setting.
Yeah, I think there's certainly, whether it's the trades or, I'm personally a product of co-op education. I went to a university in my undergrad, so it wasn't trade, but that had, the only way you could get a commerce degree at the university at that time was with a co-op education. Since, unfortunately, they've backed off that because of the problem of finding enough employers for the people who want to do the program. But it was a wonderful experience, and I think that when I later went on and did grad work, and I was a teaching assistant for an undergrad program that wasn't co-op, to me there was a notable difference in the quality of the thinking, in particular like the 4th year students of that program versus the program I'd gone through, because of the practicality of the application that's learned and the iterativeness of taking something, and I think, you watch kids do it. Like if you sat a kid down, a 3-year-old, and told them how to put a puzzle together, that's not going to work nearly as well as giving them the puzzle and letting them explore with some guidance. And so I think guided exploration is a huge aspect of human learning, whether it's in the school system, whether it's in the post-secondary system, or whether it's later in your career. And so I think, a great way of guided exploration is through, co-op or work placements or experiential high impact, exchange programs, like all these things that broaden your expertise. And I think the trades college program, or, whatever the correct term is, I think it's growing in importance. It's certainly growing in importance in the labor market because, there is a desire to get people into those hands-on experiences in a much more practical way earlier and sooner. And I think that, personally, I believe as the demographic shift in Canada, there's going to be a continuing growth in the need of the skilled trades and practical learning experiences.
Paul?
Yeah, so 2 points, and actually some of them already made, so I'll be brief. In terms of what we think of as the traditional apprenticeable trades, they have been expanding in Manitoba, and there's a great demand. There's also a great turnover that's creating opportunities for younger students to come up through that stream. And I agree, we should be placing more value on that. There are aspects of the German model that we should actually be thinking about emulating. It starts much earlier, and the exposure to those streams starts much earlier in the German model. And I think there's elements, even if it did take 150 years to establish the full system. But it's certainly, that is one very clear development, and it's taking place in Manitoba. And I think there's areas where we're trying to extend that model to other professions. And I think that's also a very healthy development. But actually, I think there's a broader point here. And if we think of, in a very stereotypical fashion, the idea of post-secondary education is, traditionally you sit in a classroom for 3 or 4 years, being crammed with theoretical knowledge, and then you go out into the real world and apply that. I think that's breaking down. I think that's a very healthy thing. I think, we talk about apprenticeships, and we almost immediately go to the trades, to what we would, in the past have called the working class professions. Well, there are so many other areas. I mean, doctors undergo apprenticeships. They don't call themselves apprentices, but there's a very substantial component of supervised work experience, which is considered to be part of their education. And I think bringing in more elements of that to all aspects of advanced education, I think is a very healthy development. And it's taking place, but again, there's that element of partnerships. We need employers to be willing to take that on, and we need mechanisms that encourage them to see the advantage of doing so, and actually then takes their input into account for developing our programming.
Thanks. Michael?
Yeah, I definitely echo a lot of things. I think much to everyone's surprise, I'm not just here to complain, but I think that actually students have really benefited in this province from investments in co-op programs, joint programs. I know a lot of universities are working on experiential learning programs, which is, I think, a really, really important way forward. So I think it's really exciting. The other piece is I know there's lots of collaboration between the universities. Even in the past year, I think that's grown, and I think for students that's really exciting. I think we should still, have autonomous universities, but I know there has been a move to have an ability to transfer your credits a little bit easier, and I know for Manitoba students that's a really exciting way forward in order to appreciate the individual pathways that are available. I think on the German example, and I think it exists in a number of other European Union countries, the other example I was thinking of was if anyone watches House of Cards, Frank Underwood has this program called AmWorks. I think it's very funny where essentially there's funding available and he talks about like no American should be unemployed. It's an interesting example because we talk a lot about the crisis of youth and underemployment. So youth unemployment is almost twice the national average, and underemployment, either you're overqualified for your job or you're not working enough to make the bills. It's at a really, really critical point in our country. So to bring it closer to home, other than the German example, in Ontario, there's to get a bit policy wonky, there's a work integrated learning policy that is actually a committee that brings together folks from post-secondary sector, from labor, from industry, and it talks about the work integrated learning programs, all of these things that I'm talking about that can be available in Ontario. So I think this is something that we could look at for Manitoba and what that would look like to bring folks together to kind of have a more holistic approach to all of these different programs that we're talking about.
Great, thank you. Other contributions? Here.
I'm Mark Friesen with Assiniboine Community College. And I'd like to revisit the piece about the allocation of scarce resources to achieve public policy ends. In particular, one of the instruments that grabs my attention is the graduate tax rebates. And I'm wondering if any of you have seen any evidence that these graduate tax rebates have either inspired more people to access post-secondary education because they know they'll get their tuition fees back at some much later point in time, or that they've had any discernible impact on graduate mobility, that they've actually been successful in retaining students in any given province.
No.
There's no evidence? Or?
There's absolutely no evidence of any of that. I've done that work for one of the two eastern provinces that had a graduate rebate, and they're looking to change those. I mean, Manitoba's is the most generous in the country, and the evidence that it has changed out-migration, the evidence that it has brought in migration, you can look at the last 3 or 4 national graduate studies and look at the inflows and outflows. There's no difference. There's just none. It's a windfall gain to people who were going to do what they were going to do anyway. The amount of money it would take to actually, and we actually did a survey, my company did a survey of students. We said, so how much, where do you think you're going to study? How much do you think you're going to make? How much more would it take you to convince you to go to each of the other 9 provinces, right? And I'm sorry to say, nobody wants to come to Manitoba or Saskatchewan, or Newfoundland, really. They're too far out there. They're not seen as attractive destinations. So on average, if you ask people that question, the number you comes back is it would take an extra $10,000 or $15,000 per year in income to convince people to move. And across most borders, you're still talking 5 or 10. Graduate tax rebate is maybe 2 per year, right? I've forgotten, I get the provinces confused a little bit, but over the course of 5 or 7 years or however long it is. It's not an insignificant number, but it's not going to move people very much. And so 80 or 90% of the money is going to people who would have stayed here anyway, or would have moved here anyway. What's the point?
I, in a different political environment, joked that when one of these was introduced in another part of the country, I hoped we were educating our students well enough that they would do that analysis and understand it's not worth it.
Hi, my name is Kate Yee. I've worked in a number of post-secondary institutions. Currently, I'm with University of Manitoba. And it seems to me that we need to almost change the question from the time we're talking in elementary all the way up to post-secondary, from not what are you going to be, not putting a label on what they are, because I'm always telling students, you're going to be doing a job that we don't even have a title for yet, okay? To how are you going to make a difference and contribute to society, because then they have to determine what kind of skills, knowledges, competencies they need to come up with in order to be successful in their future. And when I talk about being, making a difference, contributing to society, I'm not talking about making headlines, but making a difference to the quality of life of the general population that we have. So we talk about AI, right? That brings me to the idea that eventually we're going to potentially have driverless garbage trucks picking up our garbage and recycling. I love the fact that I always say I love the fact that somebody picks up my garbage, because I don't want to go to the dump all the time, okay? So I appreciate the people that do that, but we need people who are going to develop that driverless truck. We're going to have people who are going to figure out how they're going to logistics of going through the city. We're going to need the people to actually build it. And we're going to need the people who are going to have to problem solve when they start driving all over our lawns that we spend so many weekends manicuring. So that's just more of my statement than a question. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone want to respond to that? Gervan?
I think you're making a really important point to all of us, and maybe a good segue to the discussion as well, in the sense that when we think of education, we think of it, the discussion has really been around educating individuals for the job market and so forth, but educating individuals to be problem solvers, and then taking a look at educating a population, not simply in terms of whether it's Winnipeg or Brandon or Manitoba, but educating Canadians in order to be innovators and world leaders. That context is very, very different than whether it's apprenticeship or whether it's this or that. And I think regardless of what the source is of education or how we keep up with education, our capacity to be problem solvers is, back to Annette's point, are some of the skill sets that will be needed regardless of what jobs they are. And that construct as to when we take a look at the profile of our population in Manitoba or in terms of Canada, are we strategically positioning ourselves as a society to be world leaders and problem solvers at a global level? And I think those are some of the broader items that, regardless as to how we fund it or those kinds of questions, what are the characteristics of the individuals that we're graduating, and similarly, what are the characteristics of the individuals who are in the institutions in terms of our own capacity to actually have that thought process to assist our students in being the global leaders that we'll need to be if we're going to be a global nation and a leading nation at a global level. So I think when you start triggering that back to that, solving that problem of the garbage truck running over your lawn, it's not dissimilar to the question as to what will be that problem when we do fusion and we're having one energy source, or when we have AI, or whether we're trying to solve global warming. So those big questions are also similar to the small questions that we have to answer in the classroom. So I think it's a really good segue in terms of the thought process.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Ursula Kreitoff, and I've been involved with universities and in the labor areas of research and so on for labor market. And so actually, I love what was just being talked about, because I think this is one of the fundamental questions that we have to be thinking about, whatever our post-secondary institution is and so on, is about what our role is to society. It's not actually to employers, it's not actually to government, it's not actually to anybody, but it's to us as people holistically and to society. But as we try to solve these kinds of problems, I actually want to raise an issue that some people might find kind of heretical, if you like. And that is that I do think that we need to address the reality that there's a lot of institution and individual inertia in our education system, but especially, I think, in our post-secondary education institution. And as somebody who's been involved in universities, I hesitate to say this, but I actually think universities are some of the most hidebound institutions in education. We have a lot of challenges in trying to bring about any kind of change in the way in which we do things and in what we actually teach. And I think that we have to become much more creative about that. We have to really step back and do some big thinking about some big ideas and big innovations in the way in which we do things. Sorry, I've made some notes and I'm losing track of where they are. Nothing like notes to try to keep track of things. So I think we need to innovate more in terms of what our outputs are, what our structures are, what our flexibility is. And I think we're going to need to develop a much more creative environment in which we devote, as institutions, far more attention to how do we change ourselves. We're doing it in small, micro steps, very much incrementally. I think as institutions, we need to step back and think much more holistically about what we could be doing that would be very different. I don't know if anybody here has a brand new book, and it's called The End of Average by a gentleman prof called Todd Rose, who's actually now at Harvard, who started out as a high school dropout and eventually made his way to leading an innovative unit at Harvard. But the point that he makes is that we do need to be rethinking about how we organize our degrees, how we organize the ways in which you have relationships between courses and all of those kinds of things in order to focus on and this has been raised already, flexible pathways and different approaches. Maybe we don't need to have a Bachelor of Arts in political science, but maybe we need a Bachelor of Arts in certain kinds of thinking or in tackling certain kinds of problems. Thinking beyond the parameters that we currently have. And for that, I think we're going to have to think a lot about who we're hiring, what we're thinking about doing with those people, what our expectations are. And I think we just need to step back far more, I think, than we have been so far, because I think we risk being stuck in a lot of inertia as we try to move forward to adapt to a world that's moving much faster than we are.
Thanks, Ursula. So, not that heretical, actually. Go ahead.
So well put. My career has always been in the middle of change in very different systems. And in the health system, we used to have conversations about whether we wanted to change in an evolutionary way or a revolutionary way. And there were times when I concluded it was best to do reform by stealth. But anyways, universities do have this reputation for being very stuck in the past. But I will say that I think in Manitoba as a whole, the system is taking some bold steps that I think are viewed by some as revolutionary. So I think, for example, our commitment to indigenization, which is kind of another new word that we've been talking about lately, is being viewed by others as quite revolutionary. So I agree with you. It's the life of a president to figure out how to do revolutionary things that appear to people in the community as incremental and safe and evolutionary. I'm looking at some of my staff right now, faculty and staff.
It's a challenge, though, isn't it? Because one of the things that we expect from ourselves, for those of us who are in the universities, and one of the things that society legitimately can expect from us is that we preserve and pass on the intellectual heritage. What we get stuck on sometimes is the heritage and not the current moment. Gervan?
Maybe 2 short points. The first one, I think institutional change is often a function of the degree of urgency that the agents within actually see. And in that context, at times, post-secondary educational institutions, whether colleges or university, maybe the entire education system, can become detached from the social challenges that are urgent. And I think the closer we get to be institutions that are solving societal problems, then that generates the urgency that we look internally to see if we have the right alignment in order to do it. And to Annette's point, I think what we did recently in terms of Indigenous education and the blueprint that was signed, I think there was a recognition across the entire education system that this is an urgent item that we need to be a part of the solution. And we signed up and we made the changes, and we're in the process of going forward. Not perfectly, of course, but there is a revolution at hand. And so I do think that the degree to which we start looking at the broader societal issues as our issues, it generates the internal urgency, and I think we will change, and we are changing. To Annette's point as well, similarly, I worked in government and in industry and several universities, and I often think when we're in universities, we think that we're stale, but I should say that there are lots of companies that's gone bankrupt because they wouldn't change either. So we're no better or worse.
Alex, were you looking to get in on this?
Yeah, we have gone through periods in history where governments have said, you know what, universities don't meet our needs. They can't change. So the grandes écoles in France, they're basically Napoleon's view, in a couple cases, the last two of the Louis, I can never remember which ones. And they're saying it's not good enough. We need a school for engineers. We need a school for bridge builders. We need a school for artillerymen. And that's where, Polytechnique comes from. Right. What I think you're seeing today in a couple places in North America is a move to create new institutions that do not have academic departments. So Rochester, Minnesota, and Harrisburg in Pennsylvania are two examples of new institutions where they say, you know what, the department is the problem. The department is the source of all complication. The department is, and the push to create new cost centers, new programs, right? And they involve creating one or two extra courses, which are inevitably low enrollment and hence lose money and take up faculty time. And now you got to have more sessionals to back up the courses that they're not teaching. Harvard only has 50 degrees. Most mid-sized Canadian universities have over 400. And it doesn't sound like it costs a lot. It's just a course here and a course there, but it adds up. And that kind of thing, I think that sweeping away some of that clutter is important. And it's doable. There's a couple of universities in Australia, Melbourne's one of them. They went from 150 degrees to 6. And they did it in 2 years. It was a very interesting process.
Yeah, I think a lot of the piece that in my mind has a lot to do with pedagogy, how we're teaching. I think that there's still instances where we're stuck in the old mindset that a student's brain is blank and we have to pour knowledge into it. And I think there have been a lot of efforts made to move away from that, but I certainly have even been in situations myself where that's the feeling I get from the classroom setting. So I think a lot of what we talked about has been moving on, and I know that there's a lot of commitment here to moving to a place that that allows students to bring the experiences that they have already to the classroom, to allow a sharing experience, to allow a multitude of different perspectives to kind of come to the fore, and a different approach to pedagogy in that way. And I know some folks have talked about indigenization, and I think that plays an important role also in how we get our knowledge and the questions that we're asking. It changes science, it changes how we're approaching and how we view the earth. And I think that, to me, is of benefit to all of us in terms of what indigenization is actually doing to our theories of knowledge and the pedagogy in the classroom. And I think that's a super exciting move towards that kind of innovation and that kind of classroom, that kind of quality of education, rather than a much more ivory tower model that I think we are still stuck in sometimes.
So some of the things that, like the Indigenous Education Blueprint, things like that, I think they're wonderful and they are a breakthrough. But one thing, and it may be heresy, and I don't know a lot about, haven't had as much exposure in the college system, but in my life, I've been a student, of course. I've been a member of a university senate for about 4 years. I've been on the board of regents of a university. And there's a paradox in all that. that I find just, for what it's worth, personally fascinating, and speaks directly to the point in the question the person was saying, which is, you sit in a university classroom, with a great professor, and with a great, set of classmates and cohorts, and you're exposed to some of the most breakthrough thinking and wonderful exploration of new ideas and new concepts. And then, yet the university, at least the experiences that I've had exposure to, university senates and board of regents, et cetera, is the decision-making structures of a university seem to me to be the hardest place I've ever experienced to turn those ideas into action. So for what it's worth, I find that, so to the point whether you call that inertia, as the person said, or whatever, I find it amazing that the very thing that drives that most beautiful exploration of thought and idea turns into something that stands in the way of those ideas ever being turned into action and slows that down. So, I don't have a solution for that, but it's an observation.
I can tell you what I'm trying, and what I'm trying as an outsider coming back in is ask a lot of why questions. Yeah. Why do we do it this way? What are we trying to project? So, anyway.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
Do you get good answers?
You know what? I get answers, and we make changes as changes are required. So incremental, not revolutionary.
Here?
I observed that the conversation this evening began with sort of the value of post-secondary education in the province and talking a bit about government policy and funding and so forth, and it's now moving much more into what the post-secondary education institutions themselves can or ought to do differently. And I'm enjoying that conversation. I'd like to just build on that and push it a little bit further and to ask the student leaders and the presidents to respond. What in your mind is the top thing that your institution ought to be doing differently? Where are you missing the mark, and where is it within your grasp, your purview to make a change? What would it be?
Okay, you said student leaders and presidents?
Including the host, if you wish to speak.
I'm happy to speak. I'm just going to warn my colleagues on the platform here. I feel very strongly that when we invite you to something that's scheduled to end at a certain time, it should end then, because people make other commitments. So we've got, by my watch, 7 minutes, and we've got more than 7 people. So, very quickly, we'll start over there.
I don't want to go first. Sorry. Can't choose one.
Paul.
Okay, I already talked about partnerships, but let me add. So I get two. I think collaboration between the institutions, and I think it's underway, and the blueprint is a good example of that. I think it's a way to challenge from the outside, and I think universities aren't alone. Colleges have that same challenges. We insist on being self-governing, but being responsive to our external environment is something that has to balance that off. And I think there's a lot that we can do, some that we have done, by actually, as a sector, responding to the large issues and making our systems more navigable for our students.
Annette.
So the Higher Education Council of Ontario recently looked at value of post-secondary education across the country. And Manitoba was rated reasonably well, so we were low in terms of costs and medium in terms of performance. But one of the issues they noted, one of the challenges we all have in the post-secondary system, is a challenge of retention, however you define it. We have a lot of students who start who don't finish. In some instances, they might go to U of M from U of W for medicine. Well, that's a good thing. I want to count that as a success. But I think we have a lot of students who come in not really knowing what it is they're coming into and not necessarily getting the supports, the services they want to figure out how to make best use of their time. So retention.
So I represent the 26,000 undergraduate students at the U of M, and the U of M has always struggled at being a commuter campus and what it means to be part of that community, what it means to be part of a broader Manitoban community. And I really want to see a development amongst the students and create a culture there where they really do recognize the societal benefit of what they're doing. It's not just about coming and graduating with a degree in engineering or law or dentistry. Those are phenomenal things, but something that we've tried to do on a student level is really make commitments in undergraduate research. And I'd love for our university, and there has been a lot of action on this, but I'd love for our university to keep pushing undergraduate research and make sure that students really understand that it is a place for the development of human intellectual thought, and that even if you're not a graduate student, you can participate and maybe instill that love for research and learning at a younger age, and it's not just about the designation. But on top of that, I think something that the province, the universities, students, everybody has to work together is a strategic priority that all of the universities have identified. And for us at the University of Manitoba, we really need to keep pushing. The work is not nearly done in terms of the reconciliation process. And the largest issue for me personally that I see in our society is the chasm that often exists between Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities. And so that's something that everybody's identified, but there's a lot more work that needs to be done on that. So those are the two areas that I'd like to see continual work on.
Yeah, I think, as one thing that I'm really passionate about, and I think the University of Winnipeg is really taking bold steps towards, is indigenization. So if you look at the Indigenous credit requirement and the steps that, the Student Association have taken with, faculty and administration, is, that we're one of the leaders in Canada in terms of post-secondary education. So one of the conversations that is being had right now across the nation is, who's going to be teaching these courses? Who's going to be teaching these Indigenous credit requirement courses? And how are we going to deal with situations that arise in classrooms where students may be ignorant to certain histories? How are we going to deal with, Indigenous students that may be facing racism or discrimination within the classrooms? I think dealing with institutional racism, is going to be a big part of reconciliation. And Indigenous students and faculty and administrators can't do it by themselves. We need to do it with non-Indigenous people as well. When it comes to, the content criteria, I think that, non-Indigenous people can teach Indigenous content, with one exception. So with the University of Winnipeg, there's 5 content criteria. So there's Indigenous culture, Indigenous history, Indigenous ways of knowing, contemporary Indigenous issues, and Indigenous languages. From my perspective, personal perspective, I think that Indigenous academics and scholars should be given priority for Indigenous ways of knowing and Indigenous culture. But there's no reason why that a non-Indigenous person can teach contemporary Indigenous issues, Indigenous history, or Indigenous languages. And if we look at Indigenous languages, I think that if a non-Indigenous person is teaching those things, that's reconciliation in action. So I think that, these things are very important to talk about, and that, all institutions need to look at indigenization in a meaningful way, and not just, not just placing little things here and there, but really looking at the real issues and dealing with them.
Thank you. Gervan.
Well, at Brandon University, I think quick 3 major priorities. I think the first one is taking a look at the value proposition that we're delivering to our students, including the student experience, would be one broad priority. The second one would relate to community and regional economic development and social development. How are we a catalyst for growth in the region and for the community, and the kind of partnerships that we can generate, particularly with Assiniboine Community College, by way of example, in the community in terms of contributing to that. But a third one that may encompass some of the points just already made is to ask ourselves as a university, how are we contributing to the betterment of society? And that has a lot of touch points in that, and that's a core driver. So I would say those are our 3 drivers.
Thanks for letting me go last. I couldn't choose one, so I'll challenge that part of the question. I think if I were to choose, it would be access, upfront access in particular. And I think when we increase that upfront access, it has so many domino effects for the things that we have been talking about. And in my mind, I'm a strong believer that we need to fully publicly fund our institutions and eliminate tuition fees. And I think that for a lot of the times, this is a radical idea. But right now we have 2 candidates who are running for president of the United States who've both talked about this idea, and that's almost unheard of if we can comment on American politics. Like that's pretty radical, that's pretty huge, but it's exciting to me, especially we're seeing so many young people flocking towards Bernie Sanders, who's talking about this idea. To me, I see it as the future, and I think that it's no longer kind of just the hopeful dreams of students. I think that we're moving to this place, recognizing the role that post-secondary education can play, how important 70% of jobs now require some sort of post-secondary education. It's replaced a high school diploma. To me, when we talk about the intrinsic value of education, we need to be sure that it's fully accessible for as many students, as many possible students as possible.
Sorry. Kanibut Wapchi Mukwa, Indejanikas. My spirit name is Standing White Bear. I would love to solve the strategic issues that Ursula mentioned, to see a more dynamic combination of collegial governance, collegial responsibility, and the other mechanisms that move our universities forward more slowly than some of us would like. But I think the overwhelming pressing issue in this province is justice and reconciliation for Indigenous people. And the universities have an amazing role to play there, in my view. If I could only do one thing, I would work there. Thank you for being here. Really appreciate, please, our panelists. You can look at our website, UM Today, to get a recap of tonight. We'll do this again on May 18th here. Our topic will be what more can Manitoba's most powerful do to open the door to diversity? And we'll consider power and privilege in Manitoba and whether the doors to Manitoba's inner circles are as open as they should be to minorities and those from outside the province. If you're looking for a thrill tomorrow night, come to our 3-minute thesis competition at 7 o'clock in the Robert Schultz Theatre on the Fort Garry campus. Thank you for being here tonight. Reception outside. Good night.